So Di Stubbs, who is running the session for us this morning, is Head of Training and Research at Child Bereavement UK. And is going to talk to us about working with bereaved by suicide and their families. Now, this is a difficult subject that sadly too many people are being affected by, but I think it will be good to know how we can support them and have some tools as a result of Di being with us today. So I'm going to hand it over to Di now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sally, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Right, I'm going to do that thing that people do at the beginning of the webinar, where they, share their slides and then they fiddle for a bit while they try and get it onto from current slide. And Sally, can you just confirm that I'm sharing there, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see your slides.
Thank you. And just bear with me while I just go to presenter view. There we go. Is that showing properly? Lovely. Thank you. So this is me. And I want to just tell you a tiny bit about Child Bereavement UK. We have an unusual dual sort of function within the bereavement sector, in that we support both families when a child is grieving the death of somebody important or preparing for the death of somebody important, and also when a child has died. So we're supporting families, siblings, wider family members. And we support children and young people up to the age of 25, anybody affected by the death of a child. We also have a big commitment to providing training and this sort of awareness raising, because we think it's so important that we're contributing towards building a grief-aware society. The sort of work that all of you people are doing every day in being so supportive of the bereaved people that you come across, the people who are deeply grieving somebody important, and we want to play our part in contributing to that. I'm going to cover, a little bit about, the impact of suicide loss, talk about the language around it, a little bit about looking after ourselves and things like that. And what you will notice is, as well as having a very old woman delivering this webinar today, I'm very old school when it comes to things like slideshows and PowerPoints. If you had one of my colleagues, you'd probably have 3 beautiful words and a picture of an orchid. I believe in chucking down an awful lot of words so that when we send you the slides, and we'll send you the slide pack at the end, you'll have stuff you can look back on, and you needn't be taking notes at the moment. Now, Sally's already hinted at it, but I think it's really important that we make the point now that this is a really emotional topic, and I would guarantee that somebody around the screen at the moment has probably experienced this terrible loss. And so just either, you may be on your own in an office or somewhere, just get all of your sort of self-protection and self-care things up. The message about confidentiality is sometimes I find myself sharing a story of a family I've worked for, and I think, I know they've given me permission to share it, but maybe don't go and tell other people outside of this webinar. So that's a message to myself more than anything else. So let's start by putting this subject into a bit of a context. And a bit of a context because, as I say, we support both children who've been bereaved and adults who've been bereaved, is a sort of the headline on how many bereaved children are out there. You only need to read the red ones. So round about 127 children, that's under 18, every single day are bereaved of a parent in the UK. Many more, of course, will be being bereaved of, a brother or a sister, or the person they sit next to in class, or their favourite teacher, or even somebody in the media that makes an impact on them. And in fact, 78% of children report that they have experienced a significant bereavement, something that actually, that's of a human. If we're looking at how many children die, well, there were around about 10 children die a day. Most children die under the age of 1, but that's a huge number of families in the course of a year who've experienced this. And we still have some terrible inequalities So, you know, child deaths are higher in Black and Black British families than in white families. They're twice more likely to happen in poorer communities. So that's our sort of overall context. But and I'm going to stick with facts at the moment because it just gives us some sort of framework to build on. When deaths have been through suicide. So there were 7,000 such deaths in the United Kingdom last year. And that's the ones that are recorded as suicide or the particular category in the ONS figures. There will be many more where the coroner thinks maybe it was a suicide, but records an open verdict. So this is an underestimate of how many people die by suicide. But that means well, you know, the time that you spent making the tea before the webinar and the time you'll make making the tea after the webinar, you know, probably one person has died by suicide. 3/4 of all the people who die in the UK by suicide are male. And if we're looking at the suicides of young people, 5 deaths of a person under 35 every single day, 4 deaths by a teenager in a week. And it's the leading cause of death for men under 50, and the rate's rising for young women. And on this particular one, what I wanted to concentrate on is the last bullet point, really. You'll sometimes hear the government saying for every suicide, 6 people will be significantly affected. Well, nobody who works with people bereaved by suicide believes that figure. There's a strong figure of about 110 people caught, as we put there, in the ripples of each death by suicide. But actually, if you speak anecdotally to anybody and if you add up, I was involved recently in supporting a large community after a vicar had taken her own life. And if you start with her family, if you then go on to her friends, her church community, the wider community in the town where she lived, the entire Church of England, it appeared, were all affected somewhere along the way, and anybody who had ever heard her speak or think. So, you know, there is a huge number of people and suicide ripples out. Now, I know that you all work in this field, so I'm not going to do a sort of masterclass in grief theory or anything like that, but you'll know that grief comes with, you know, whatever the age of the person and whatever the cause of death, with these huge whirlpool of feelings. Anybody who ever thinks that you go through 3 or 4 feelings in grief, you know, hasn't spoken to a grieving person or hasn't been a grieving person. So many of these feelings. And these, of course, will be complicated, and I'll come to the complications that suicide brings. But basically, they can be broken down into the sort of feelings and thoughts that people have after somebody has died. And there's just a few. As I said, you can't name all of the feelings, but maybe those are some of the ones that people most frequently mention. Anger and guilt and numbness. But also the things that people have after anybody has died, for whatever reason, is the questions, you know, what if? What if so-and-so had happened? Why did they do this? You know, why did they die? Why were they riding their bike, you know, in a bus lane? You know, this sort of thing. The other things that people experience, of course, are physical responses that actually, you know, affect them physically, literally. People of whatever age, you know, children, adults, will have sleep changes. They may find that all they want to do is sleep, to try and sort of numb out what's happened. Or they find that sleep has just disappeared, you know, insomnia comes to visit and to live with them. They may find that they have night terrors or nightmares. People often have difficulties with eating. They can't bear to eat. Then again, they feel desperately that they want all the biscuits. People feel ill. Tummy aches, headaches are very common, but they also have illnesses, genuine illnesses, that mimic maybe something of what happened to the person who died. And people may not want to be apart from their loved ones. We often talk about separation anxiety in terms of children, but this can also, and they will, of course, if a parent has died suddenly or a sibling has died suddenly, they will be desperately wanting to hold on to everybody else around them and not want to be separated from them. However, there is also the fact that adults, I mean, especially if one child has died, and if one child has died by suicide, they will not want to let any other children out of their sight. People will go back to earlier behaviours. For children, that means they'll go back to things like bedwetting or thumb sucking or, favourite toys. Adults do the same sort of thing, but they use different methods. And everybody will experience a loss of focus, a loss of confidence. And they have this push me, pull you between wanting to be alone, needing to be alone, but also wanting company. And whenever you've got company, you want to be alone, and vice versa. And the big things that affect how we grieve are the relationship we have with the person who died, the way they died, the environment, the family, the community, the people around you, but also yourself, what you were like. And I'm just going to show you, this is not to be studied in this webinar, but when you see it, it's the way in which when we're working with a family, when we have a child, for example, or an adult come in front of us, we're asking ourselves, what is the meaning of the death of this particular person? So who died? Was it, was it their dad who they loved deeply and saw every minute of the day? Or was it their dad they saw, if they were lucky, once a year on their birthday and he usually forgot a present? That sort of thing. In this particular way, was it long expected? Was it by suicide or violence? Death never occurs in isolation. So what else is going on? Is Granny also ill? Did the dog die? Is there exams happening? Has somebody just lost their job? How does this family work? Is it the sort that shares everything and talks all of the time? Does a jigsaw when they all come home in the evening, cooks a meal together, or do they all scatter off to their sort of satellite screens? And how does the community around them respond? Their work community, their faith community, their school community, all of that. Do people ignore them or support them? But most importantly, what's the impact of all of this on this particular unique person? Because grief is as unique as a fingerprint and will depend on so many factors as to how this person reacts to any death. And just a reminder to myself, as well as to anything else, that every family, as well as every individual, is unique, and you can't assume things based on one person. So, bereavement by suicide, which is the point of this particular webinar, it's been described as grief with the volume turned up. It's like every experience that people have, every feeling, every question that they have, every behaviour they have gets ramped up when it's been by suicide. I think this quote puts it really well. My experience of suicide is the equivalent of a bomb going off in your living room when you're sitting watching telly. Afterwards, you're astonished you're alive, but everything has changed and you have a million shards of glass embedded in your soul. Some of them are so big they fall out straight away, leaving gaping wounds, but the little pieces, they can take decades to work their way up to the surface. So to start talking about this, I just want to talk about the language. So this is the language that we choose to use and we would recommend everybody to use. You still occasionally will hear somebody say committed suicide. That is such an outdated expression. Suicide stopped being a crime back in 1961, and relatives, friends find it really hurtful because it implies it's still a crime. We only use committed for a crime. So please, not committed suicide. And if you can avoid it, not chose to die, because although it may feel like that for the family, it didn't necessarily feel like that for the person who died. So we prefer language such as he took his own life, or she died by suicide, or they ended their life. And one of the things we sometimes suggest is actually not talking about it being a death by suicide. We don't tend to, when it's a death by, a heart attack, talk about how the actual, arteries or veins or ventricles or whatever had a problem. We talk about heart disease or something like that. And actually what kills people is their mental health or their depression or whatever. And the focus on the means is sometimes not helpful. I know it's difficult and it's complicated, and we will talk about a death by suicide, but just as a thought. This booklet is a really helpful one, and we'll mention it again later on. Help is at hand is for anybody affected by suicide. And one of these quotes is, "I feel sometimes that people define my mum's life by her death. she's stigmatized by the label suicide. Someone dies from cancer or a car crash, they're not blamed. But with suicide, I felt I had to explain how kind, lovely and giving she was. She wasn't selfish, but depression had robbed her of her will to live. And this from a parent who had, gave us this quote sometime later. After a while, I realised I had to give him ownership of his decision in whatever state of mind he'd been in at the time. Because even if I had all the answers to the whys, the reality, the loss, the grief was still going to be the same. I include quite a lot of quotes when I'm talking about bereavement and the families that we work with, because I think it's really important that we try to give a voice to the people that we come across, the people that we're supporting either in our one-to-one work or our group support or our indirect support over the helpline. So what might make a death by suicide particularly challenging? And it basically comes into these two broad categories. So it's the feelings and the thoughts, the questions of behaviours of themselves and all of the people who are involved. But it's also the reaction of the world outside. More than any other deaths, those who are bereaved by suicide have to face other people's reactions. So this is some of the feelings that people may add to our whirlpool. I'm going to just click to show, to remind you of the whirlpool of feelings, and then go back to the ones that maybe are particularly around suicide. You'll see we've got why up there, so loudly, and the what ifs and the if onlys and things like that. But also some of these questions like feeling that you've been rejected or feeling that you've been abandoned, but very much the stigma and the sort of judgment that you feel that the rest of society are saying, the mums at the school gate, the work colleagues, the guys down the pub, whatever. Well, what did they do that meant that this happened to somebody that they loved and cared about? So a reminder of the whirlpool of the other things. And I'm not trying to list all of those thoughts and feelings, but we put a few down just alphabetically to show that there is no order, there's no hierarchy when it comes to feelings and thoughts of after a death by suicide. But these are some of the strongest things that come through. If you are talking with groups of people bereaved by suicide, these are some of the things that they will talk about. And their own suicidal thoughts is something which is just worth picking out of that list and noting that there is a risk factor for people bereaved by suicide that they will themselves consider or take their own lives at a future point. The evidence seems to show that if they receive support at a timely time, from people around them, that's not necessarily professionals, that can be, friends and family, actually their risk rate goes below that of the general population. So it's not necessarily a difficult thing, but it's always something to just keep vaguely in mind. So I'd say one of the strongest things for families after a death by suicide is just struggling to understand what on earth has happened. People will talk about having the why question scream in their mind for, years, still wake up some mornings screaming, why did this happen? We love them so much, we'd have got them any of the help in the world. They could have quit their job. They could have done this. They could have done that. If only they had, gone away to Dorset for the weekend or, something different. And the responses that people talk about, it seems as if a death by suicide brings absolutely instinctive, visceral guilt to people. People think, I must have done something wrong for this to happen. And we don't like that feeling. So we sort of look around and try and push it away. We maybe try and find others to blame, but we often just build up rage, both at the person who died and at ourselves and at, the world around. It's a really, really difficult death to be grieving, to be mourning. And some of the additional challenges that come along are things like, finding how to talk about what happened, especially when I'm saying, you don't say commit anymore and things like that. people always want to know, how did they do it? It seems like nobody says that when somebody says, you know, my grandmother died. They don't tend to say how. They tend to say, I'm really sorry. But people are always interested in the how of a suicide. You may, as well as the stigma that you feel you have because somebody left your family, that there is, you know, the media are covering it. They may cover the inquest, or they may cover the circumstances. Especially if the person took their life in a public place, in a park, you know, off a cliff, you know, that sort of thing. They've also got to be sort of balancing supporting other people, and I've mentioned suicide risk. Now, actually talking about the death of somebody by suicide, sometimes it's difficult to actually think of the word. So I'm saying this as if you are somebody talking to friends. I know this is not where you are at in your professional setting. You won't be in this position, but I thought it might just help to find, and this is one particular family who came up with these different ways of talking about what happened to Flo. Flo was the mum of the family, so it is a real person. That's not her real name. Our lovely Flo died, and sadly it appears she took her own life. All of the information that anybody needs to know in one sentence. Flo's death is such an enormous, terrible shock, and it's so sad that it was intentional. So again, making things clear, it's a way of holding off your second question. We can't imagine what was happening for Flo, but it seems that she intended to die. Flo's death was tragic and sudden. We're now able to confirm that she did take her own life, and we're waiting for the findings of the coroner's report to know more. This will take many weeks. So, you know, back off us is basically what that's saying. Flo seems to have died from an illness affecting how her mind was thinking and feeling. And only Flo knew how things became unbearable. We all wish we could take that away from her. So just some ways that one family found that they could talk about what happened to Flo. The most important thing also is the takeaway that nobody outside the family are owed an explanation. You know, not cousins, not friends. You know, nobody is owed an explanation. And I want to just briefly divert across to talking with children about suicide. People think that that is, you know, almost an impossible thing to do. How on earth can we begin to talk to a child that their mum died by suicide, their dad died by suicide, their big brother did? And of course, one of the challenges with supporting children is the level of their understanding about how much they already understand about death and dying and what that means, something which will grow throughout their sort of childhood and youth and things like that. So I just wanted to, you know, we run a lot of, anybody is ever interested, we run a lot of training about supporting children when somebody is expected to die, supporting children and young people after somebody has died, supporting children bereaved through suicide. So we've got much longer courses, which you're so welcome to come along to. So I'm going to basically deal with this huge topic in a slide or two. I really recommend that book. It comes from our sister organisation, Winston's Wish, but it's a booklet that takes everybody through the language, the feelings, the, you know, understanding of children, all of that after somebody has taken their life. So the sort of caveat that the sort of stages that I'm going to talk about is taken at the child's pace. So it depends so much about, you know, if they are neurotypical, neurodiverse, just understanding what they get at each stage. And this may be that if you're talking to a teenager, or if a parent was talking to a teenager, they would do it in one conversation. It might need to be spread out longer for a 3-year-old, 6-year-old, something like that. So the first bit is explaining that the person has died and what that means, checking that the child has understood. You know, their body stopped working, their heart stopped, their brain stopped, their lungs stopped breathing, and they died. That means that they're no longer able to do any of the things that they did before. Then it's about simple general details about the when and the where, usually the first questions and the questions that children need most. Then explaining how the person died, that they stopped breathing maybe. explaining that the person died by suicide, that's adding in the why. So we've added in the how and the why. And then more detail about the how, when, where, and then a little bit more explanation. So as you can see, if that's the sort of pathway, that might take several conversations for a primary school age child, or one conversation if you're talking to your 15-year-old. So just to actually put that into what do I actually mean? So, you start off with the reminding that people can die of illnesses that affect their bodies. You remember that Granny's friend Elsie had cancer and we went to her funeral, that sort of thing. And then explain that people can die of illnesses that just affect the way that they think or they feel or they react to circumstances. And then you can add in the fact that this person had such an illness. So it was an illness that affected their brain, the way their brains think and feel, not the ways in which their bodies were acting. And it made them feel very sad and low, very deep down inside. Not like when I say you can't have more chocolate cake or you can't stay on your PlayStation for another half an hour. It's an adult kind of illness, of sadness, sorry. And that this illness changed the way that the people were thinking, so they felt they just couldn't go on living anymore. And they tried and they tried and they tried, but it seemed so hard to do. And then we recommend or we suggest or we talk through with people if they want to, if they want another way of talking about it, if they want a little bit of extra. And I thought I would share these with you just in case they're ever at any point helpful in any conversations that you may find yourself having. We find that these are the two analogies which seem to make most sense. And these are for everyone. They're not just for a child. They may sound a bit sort of childlike, but they're for everybody, not just for children. And so one of the ones that we talk about is the concept of the room with all the doors. And we say something like, and I'm going to imagine I'm talking to a child because this is, maybe how I've most recently talked it through with a parent about how they could possibly explain. And I think it's a little bit like as if you and I had ended up in a room and the room had got hundreds of doors, dozens and dozens of doors. And if you and I had landed there, we would just think this is really interesting. And we would walk up to all those doors and we'd try the door handles and we'd find that behind all of those doors, there was something that was interesting or different or useful or something. But I think what happened for Flo, because of the way that her mind was thinking and feeling, because of the way that the illness was affecting how that was happening, that if she'd landed in that room, she wouldn't have gone up to the door. She'd have just assumed that they were all locked, or maybe she wouldn't have even seen the doors. She literally only saw one door, and that was a door that was open, and that was the door that led her to end her own life. So just a sort of caveat for everybody around the screen, just, self-care, and in case that hit home for any of you. I'm going to do another one that we use. Again, we use with children, but we found it so helpful with adults as well, as a way of looking about what may have happened. And again, I'm imagining that I'm talking to a child or young person. We all have a sort of tower inside us that keeps us strong. It's a little bit like our backbone or things like that, but it's not a real thing. But it's the thing that keeps us all held strong together when bad things happen. It's a bit like, say, and then you name some sort of building near you, the Grafton Tower or the Grafton Centre. It's all of the blocks of the Grafton Centre are held together by cement really strongly, so it can stand storm dara, it can stand, earthquakes and whatever, doesn't fall down. It's strong and secure because of that. But I think sometimes when people have an illness, and especially an illness that changes the way that people think and feel, what happens is that illness eats away at the cement. And it can happen without anybody from outside noticing. It can happen without the person themselves noticing. But it eats away at the cement so that instead of being strong like the Grafton Tower, it's actually like a block of Jenga. I found that every family in the world knows what Jenga is and has played it at some point. And as you know, with Jenga, you knock blocks out and you pile the blocks on the top. And I think that's what it can be like, is that things that happen, or thoughts or feelings, just knock out the blocks and then the pressures pile on top. And what happens is nobody knows what's going to be the last block that's going to bring the tower down. Might be a great big thing, might be just the littlest thing, a littlest nudge that actually makes the tower fall. And for Flo, or whoever you're talking about, it just meant that they couldn't go on living any longer. What we then do is we build on those analogies. We don't leave people with the idea of, only the one door open, or the crumbled bricks and blocks. We emphasize, how important it is to keep our cement strong. And we talk about all of the good ideas about keeping our cement strong, about talking and accepting help, and, things I say there, clips on YouTube, all of those things that actually help us keep our cement strong and keeps our tower good. Sometimes we get children, if we're doing this with children, to actually rebuild the tower. One good idea of things they can do to look after themselves brick by brick. So just want to come back when I'm about to turn in towards supporting bereaved people. We've talked about, the language of suicide. I also wanted to just reflect, because of thinking of the people around the screen and thinking about in memoriams and, tributes in papers and things. I think these are the words that are that we tend to see nowadays. Suddenly, somebody died suddenly, somebody died unexpectedly, somebody died suddenly and tragically. That was how the death of the vicar was reported, and everybody knew immediately. Or just sadly died on so-and-so, and then that's a bit of a clue. Just wanted to notice that when, you're talking about tributes or things like that, this seems to be the language that is gentle on the family, honours the memory of the person who died, doesn't put any blame or stigma on them, but actually does convey something of what has happened. Now, this is a general point about supporting bereaved people. And I'm not going to wade through all of these, but I just want to say that these are key things that grieving people tell us, however they've been bereaved. They really, number one, everybody says, is having their loss acknowledged, not being avoided. It's about hearing the name of the person who died. So it's literally, I was so sorry to hear that your dad died. I'm so sorry to hear that Stanley died, something like that. They really appreciate being treated as individuals, because grief is individual, and people not making assumptions about how they're going to react based, for example, on, if they're wearing a hijab, people will assume that they are going to respond in a particular way. No, grief is individual. People are individuals. They really appreciate being encouraged to talk about it, especially sharing memories. Help to support, so that they can actually express their feelings, and people understanding that not all days are going to be the same. So some of the messages that we've recently gathered from people, don't be afraid to show your humanity, I guess, and avoid platitudes, which leads us nicely into the things that people say are less helpful. And in many cases, these are just the flip of the things that people find helpful. But people, you'd think it was just a cliche, but honestly, people do cross the street to avoid people who've been bereaved, to avoid having that difficult conversation. Michael Rosen, the poet, children's author, writes very powerfully about what happened after his son died, and how the lengths his neighbour went to avoid actually talking to him. People find it less helpful to be told anything like time heals, because it doesn't. Grief stays the same forever, doesn't get better. We maybe, if we're lucky, grow a little bit of space around the grief, but grief won't get smaller. Grief will be felt differently if we've managed to grow a little bit of space for other things. People do not find it helpful, any sentence that includes at least. At least they, were a great age. At least they weren't in whatever. They don't find that helpful. They don't find it helpful being told that you understand how they feel that their precious 3-year-old child had died because your great auntie had also died. They also don't like being told how they're feeling, or people trying to solve problems. You know, you need to get onto the council and you need to, and vague offers of help. I do this. I mean, we all do this. When we mean it, do call if I can do anything, and you mean it genuinely. But what people actually find most helpful is, even if you're fibbing, I'm standing in Sainsbury's, picking up a few things. Can I get you anything? Then somebody can say yes. They can't ring you up to get to shop. I'm just about to put a wash on. Is there anything? Can I come and get your washing? Because there's no point in running this with just a bid. I wanted to just throw out this because I guess you're also sometimes supporting bereaved colleagues, and that might be after the death of any of these relationships, including another colleague, and even the death of someone in the news. We haven't talked about that, and the attempted suicide of any of these. All I'm really doing is just acknowledging that this can actually affect us as colleagues, as well as parents or family members or siblings or something. And I have a long quote here, but it just is one relevant for a sort of a working environment. This is from Guy who very senior at British Gas. My own experience of suicide has left a profound impact. A young and popular colleague said goodbye with a joke and a laugh on a Friday evening, never made it back on Monday. His death by suicide came as a total shock to his parents and family, to his friends, to his colleagues. And even years later, we ask ourselves whether we missed something that could have made a difference. And we still don't know. Just to sort of show how long these things, how long a shadow these things can last, and how the estimate of how many people may be affected by suicide is widely under. This is a booklet. You'll see it when you get the slides, but it's a booklet about for employers about managing suicide in the workplace. Now, hope you all know about this stuff because of the work that you're doing around the screens, but it's really important when we're working in this field, especially with suicide bereavement, to look after ourselves. The wonderful Atli Diragrov says our capacity is to help, closely tied to our capacity to understand and show empathy. At the same time, this makes us vulnerable. And in a sort of twist on the it's important to put your own oxygen mask on first concept, David Trickey of the UK Trauma Council says teapots need to be refilled if they're to carry on pouring cups of tea. Most people know this. Few people actually do anything about it. So pledge yourself now to be part of the people who do something about it. Self-care isn't selfish, as the little plant says. It's really important to, lean on the team, or, notice when things are actually beginning to build up, and, prioritising self-care in this sort of circumstance, really important. I wanted to flash one of the things that we do with children and young people, but, we all need a looking after ourselves first aid kit. First aid kits are for the hurts that we have on the outside, but it's really important to build one for what helps when we have hurts on the inside. Here's Blue Peter style. Here is Di's one, which includes things like being out in the countryside, or talking to friends on the phone, or chocolate, or listening to music, reading books, hugs from people that you love. So consider as homework drawing yourself your first aid kit and putting in the things that help you when you're feeling a bit overwhelmed. Which leads me on to that question of what is your poker expression for when you know you're becoming a bit overwhelmed? What's your tell for becoming full up, and asking yourself what keeps your tower strong? The tells can be things like, when I'm getting really wound up, do you get rattier with your partner or with your children, or do you eat more biscuits or a second glass of red wine and give up the walk that you promised yourself every evening? So you are a crucial part of the bottom 2 tiers of this pyramid. One of the tiers isn't physically there, but so all people need acknowledgement of what's happened, and they need being signposted or some information about where they may get support. Most people who've been bereaved, even those bereaved by suicide, will be fine with a supportive response from the people that care about them, those that are around them already, their colleagues, their friends. Some may need some one-to-one support, like Child Bereavement UK provide. Some may like a group support or even a family support. And only a very few will need some specialist support, maybe if the circumstances of what happened were particularly traumatizing. You'll see on the notes a couple of the key sources that we think are helpful. Particularly that list there are for resources after somebody has died by suicide. And really want to mention the booklet, which you see on the top one there, but on the left here, Helpers at Hand, which you can find from supportaftersuicide.org.uk, which is just helpful for anybody bereaved by suicide. Another mention of Beyond the Rough Rock for supporting children. And look out for A Shelter for Sadness. Looks like a children's picture book. Absolutely beautiful content. A reminder again of Child Bereavement UK. Our helpline is not only for families, it's also for professionals and for anybody in the sort of roles that you are carrying out. We can offer guidance on supporting anybody that you've come across, signposting, just ways of talking about certain deaths, all sorts of things. So please do use us, and our website has masses of resources. We have little videos and other resources there as well. And you'd forgive me if I gave two plugs. First plug is we are, of course, a charity that relies on donations, and we are so grateful for any support. It's challenging times for all charities, and if there's any way in which anybody around the screen can offer support, we'd be very grateful. And I've mentioned training throughout. We're very happy to offer training, either our core training or bespoke training, and you can find all of that on our website. I'm going to pop up a thank you slide. I do have a short video. Sally, would you let me get away with that?
Absolutely. How can
Okay.
I not? What a phenomenal webinar. Thank you.
So let's see if this will play. Wish me luck.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any sound, but
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll let it go with the captions. Really sorry that sound didn't play, but I hope the captions were enough to give you a sense.